Hi everyone, I'm Trish Connor-Cato, and I'll be presenting Microsoft Access 2019. In Module 5, you'll be introduced to advanced form design techniques and also how to use a special type of form called a switchboard to navigate database objects. We'll also get into designing macros to automate database tasks. We're going to start building a complex form by creating two separate forms first. So we're going to do one using the form wizard and the other from form design view. Let's go to our Create tab and access the form wizard. We want to create a form based on the orders table, not the orders query. I'm going to do the drop down and find the orders table. And the reason why is because we want to have all of the available fields in this particular form. And in the orders query, we didn't put the order ID field. So I'm going to just move all of the fields over to the right. I'm going to next my way through this using the defaults that are there for the layout. And then I'm going to name this form FRM, and I'm going to call it orders and items, orders and items, and I'm going to finish. So now I have those four fields on a form. We'll deal with the title here on the form a little bit later. In the meantime, go ahead and close that form. We're going to go back to Create, and we're going to use Form Design this time to build another form. And so if the property sheet is open on the right side of your screen, you can close that. What we need is the field list. So I'm going to click Add Existing Fields on the ribbon. And we want fields from the Order Details table. If it's not already expanded, expand it so you can see the fields. And I'm going to right click on that Order ID field and add field to view. Then I'm going to right click on the Product ID, add field to view. And last but not least, quantity. For this form, I'm going to just look at it in form view. And then I'm going to close it and save it. And we're going to call it FRM order items with no word and in between, order items, and click OK. So the complexity comes when we combine those two forms. You'll have the main form, which is going to be our orders and items form. And then we're going to have a subform, which is the order items form. So how do we do that? Let's open orders and items in design view. And the first thing we'll do is we'll change the header. So we'll get rid of FRM and put spaces between the words there up at the top. So it just says orders and items. The next thing we need to do is expand the detail section. So I'm going to put my mouse in between the detail section and the form footer section header. I'm going to click and hold and drag down just to create a little bit more space in the detail section. I'm going to drag it down just a little bit more. And a subform is a type of form control. They actually have, it's called subform subreport. So it's a control that you can use on a form or a report to nest a form into another form. So in order to access that control, I'm going to use the More button on the right side of the controls gallery to expand it. And in the third row, the third button is Subform Subreport. Go ahead and click it. When I drag my mouse over the detail section, you'll see that it looks like a plus sign with that particular icon attached to it. So what I'm going to do in the detail section is I'm going to click and hold, and I'm going to draw a square about that big and let go. And notice above the square, there's a label. It says Child 9. So this main form, the orders and items form, is known as the parent form, and your subform is the child form. So the subform wizard opens up, and it says, what data would you like to use for your subform or subreport? So we're going to use an existing form, and it's the FRM order items one that we just created. And we're going to choose next. Would you like to define which fields link your main form to the subform yourself, or choose from the list below? So what this is saying is that when I'm in form view and I navigate to the next record on the parent form, the child form should update with the corresponding data. The only way it can do that is having a common field, a relationship of sorts. So you get to choose from the list or define your own. The list is generally speaking very good. And the first item on the list is already selected. It says show SQL statement for each record in TBL orders using order ID. And we're going to do next. So now what we need to do, it's asking us to name our subform. It's basing it off of the form that we use. So we'll use that default name because we're going to get rid of that label anyway. So we're just going to do finish. So before we test it, right above the subform, you'll see the label that says FRM order items. Go ahead and delete that. It's not necessary to have it there. And we're going to switch to form view to test this out. So because you have both a form and a subform, you have two different navigation areas, record navigation areas. If I scroll to the bottom of my screen, the one on the very bottom is for the parent form, the orders and items form. The one that's closest to the subform is for the subform. So what this means is we're on order ID 1 for customer ID Astro advertising. If we look at the navigation area for the subform, it says there are two records. We're on the first record that are tied to that customer ID. So when I go to the next record, it shows me the next set of detail information. Now, on the bottom navigation for the parent form, I'm going to go to the next record, and you'll notice that the subform updated because they're related to each other. So that is a more complex type of form known as a subform. And again, the subform is just a form control. We can go ahead and save and close this form. We're going to use another type of control here to create another complex form. This time we're going to use the tab control. So we're going to do this from Create Form Design. And why you would want to use a tab form is if you have a lot of fields that you want on a form, but you don't want them all on the same page, so to speak, because it could be overwhelming. So you can split the data up on different pages, if you will. So once we have this form up, if your field list is open, you can leave it open. We're going to need it. If not, you can go ahead and use Add Existing Fields to open it. And in your controls group, the control that looks like a file folder is the tab control. We're going to select it. Now your mouse looks like a plus sign with that file folder attached to it. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to click and hold, and I'm going to draw that control so it almost fills up the entire detail section. And notice it gives you page 1 and page 2. You can even have more pages if necessary. We're going to click directly on the words page 1. So there's a caveat here. Before, when we used the field list, I said that I normally right-click on the field and add field to view. Tab controls don't particularly like that on occasion. So I'm going to use the drag and drop method here. So we want to be working out of the customers table. If it's not already expanded, go ahead and expand it in your field list. And we're going to drag the company name field. Now remember, you don't want to drag it over to the left. You want to leave room for the label. So we drag the company name. Go ahead and drag address 1. So it's underneath company name. We're going to grab city and put it underneath address 1. And we'll align these after, if necessary, once we get them on. And we're going to grab state, zip, and phone. So I want all of my labels aligned by their left edges. So I'm going to use the selection net to just drag across my labels and select just them. And then if you look up at the ribbon, there's an Arrange tab under Form Design Tools. I'm going to go to the Arrange tab. The last group is Sizing and Ordering, and you have your Align button there. And I'm going to choose Left. So those labels are now aligned by their left sides. I'm going to do the same thing with the actual fields. So I just use the selection net to grab all of the fields, and I'm going to align left. Now, the other thing that you might want to do is select everything, the labels and the fields, and this time go to the size space drop down. And for our spacing, we want equal vertical spacing. So the space between each label and the space between each field is now exactly the same. And now we're ready to click on the Page 2 tab. And we're going to add the email field here. So I'm going to just drag it and drop it. And I'm going to add the active field here and just drag and drop that. Go ahead and take a moment to select your labels and align them by the left. Do the same with the actual fields. And then select the labels and the fields and make sure they're at an equal vertical distance. All right, so we have a 2-page form. Now it would be helpful if it didn't say page 1 and page 2, so we're going to fix that. If you click on the page 1 tab, we can use the property sheet to be able to do this. So I'm going to go ahead and close the field list and go back to the form design tab and open up the property sheet. And notice the first thing that comes up on the property sheet is the name of the page. So we're going to change the name right there. We're going to change it to customer info. And in plain English, I'm doing that. And then I'm going to click on the Page 2 tab, and I'm going to rename that Status. So let's go take a look at this in Form View. Now, if you're basing a form off of a table that has a lot of records, you know that you can split them up across different pages so the form is not out of hand. Let's go back to Design View. I want to show you a few more things. So if I right-click on either of those page tabs, I get this shortcut menu. So I can insert another page here, or I can delete a page. I can change the page order here. So if I wanted the status page to come first, I could do that. I'm going to leave it the way it is. And I'm going to right click again. So there's a layout that you can look at. I'm going to leave the layout that's on, but feel free. You can get to your line and sizing options here as well. The last thing I want to do is give this form a form header section. So I'm going to right click on Detail, on that detail section header. And in the list, I'm going to click on Form Header Footer. And in the form header section, I'm going to want to put a label. So the label is that AA, capital A, small a button. I always want to use the AB for label, but that's a text box. I've done it a time or two, and it doesn't work out the way you would expect. So we're going to grab the label control. And I'm going to just draw a label about that size. And I'm going to call this Customer Information Form. And then I'm going to save it and name it FRM Customer Info. So a tabbed form is another type of complex form. So we've done tabbed and we've done subforms. And the last complex form we're going to create is known as a split form. So make sure you close out the form that you have open right now, the customer info form. And in your navigation pane, just click on the orders form, FRM orders. Just click on it so it's selected. Now we're going to go to the Create tab. So we've used the form design, we've used Form Wizard. We're going to go to More Forms here, and we're going to select Split Form. So it tells you what it does. It creates a split form that shows a data sheet in the upper section and a form in the lower section for entering information, or vice versa. It could come up. So we're going to click on Split Form, and it just does it. In this case, the data sheet is in the bottom. The actual form is at the top, right? So it's two different views of the same information. This one, the data sheet is showing all the details, right? So the orders form at the top is just showing the customer ID and one order date and one ship date, the first ones on the list. If I click on another record in the lower half, the upper half updates. So that's kind of how that works. It is known as a split form. Now notice it named it FRM Orders 1 because we had the orders form selected when we selected split form. So we're going to just save this form and we're going to call it FRM Orders Split and click OK. And that one I think may be one of the easiest ones we've done. Go ahead and close. The next thing we're going to do, and both of these are really kind of like efficiency techniques that you can use with forms and other objects in Access, but we're focused on forms right now. So what we're going to do is we are going to add a default value to a field on a form, and you'll see what effect that has on the form. And we're going to adjust the tab order on a form because there's nothing more frustrating when you're trying to key in data on the form if you're pressing the tab key and it's going to the wrong field next. And sometimes when you create forms in Design View, that happens naturally. So I want to get you prepared for it. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to open up our orders split form in Design View. We're going to assign a default value to the order date field. So the first thing we need to do is bring up our property sheet. Again, that's on the Form Design tab of the menu in the Tools group to the right. And you have to select the field that you want to put this property on. So notice right now, when you look at the property sheet, the selection type is for the entire form. All of these properties will impact the entire form. When we click on the order date field, not its label, the field itself, you'll notice selection type is text box and it has order date field in there. So we know that all of these properties are for the order date. I cannot tell you how many times I've changed properties and then realized I was on the wrong field or hadn't selected one at all. So be careful about that. You can also ensure that you're on the right field by just using the drop down here and selecting the field that you want to be on. That's another way of controlling that. So we want to assign a default value to this order date field. So in the property sheet, I'm going to scroll down until I get past all those grid line properties. And eventually, underneath keyboard language, you will see the default value property. Here, I'll put an arrow pointing to it. So we're going to click in the text box to the right of it, and we're going to type 6/14/2010. And then we're going to press our tab key to get out of that field. Notice dates have to be enclosed in pound signs, also known as hashtags now. So it did that formatting for us after we tabbed out of the field. So now we'll take a look at what this does. We're not going to save the form right now. We're going to just switch to Form View. And notice it doesn't have that date 6/14/2010 up here. Well, this is a data sheet, right? So if you scroll down to the bottom in the data sheet, it started a new record for you and it's using that default date. So let's say you have a situation where you have to input a bunch of orders for a specific date. You can go and set the default value to that date so it's less keying in for you. It's more efficient. Then you would just have to put in the ship date on the bottom half of that screen. So that's kind of how that works. It's an efficiency technique. Anyway, we're going to go back to design view, and we're just going to click on the order date field again. And we're going to go back to the default property, and we want to move that date out of there. Now we're going to create another form in design view so you can learn how to adjust the tab order on the form. There's nothing more frustrating when working on a form is every time when you press the tab key, it goes to the wrong field next. So we're going to create a form and purposely mess up the tab order so you'll learn how to fix it. We're going to go back to create and form design, and we're not going to save this form at the end of the day because it's not going to make any sense. I'm going to bring up the field list, and I'm going to add company name to the view. Then I'm going to add zip. I'm going to add city, purposely mixing these up, address 1, and then state. So let's just say we'll blame it on management. For some reason, management wants the form to be in this order, but as the person that's entering the data, it's going to be a horrific experience for you to have to enter the address information in this way, right? Starting with the zip code. So what you can do, let's go to the form view first. And because it does the tab order based on the way the fields are placed on the form initially, it's tabbing through them. When you get to the state field and you tab again, it goes to the next record. Let's go back to design view, and we're going to adjust the tab order so it goes in the normal order of somebody inputting an address. And that way we don't have to change the form because apparently management will frown on that. I love making up scenarios. So anyway, right there, I'm just going to click on a blank area to the details section so I don't have a field selected. But right there on the form design tab in the tools group, you have a tab order button. Now, sometimes Access is able to fix your tab order if you use the auto order button, but that's not going to work here. So we're going to have to manually do it. And the way it works is on the right side of the screen, each of the fields has a row header. And if I click, for example, on the row header for zip, it selects the field. And then I'm going to click in the row header for zip again and hold, and I'm going to drag that field down below state. So now I just have to drag city down below address 1, and that should be the correct order when I'm entering an address. So I'm going to click OK and go back to form view. And now when I tab through the form, it's going to the appropriate fields at the right time. And like I said, we're not going to save this form. It makes no sense. So we're just going to close it and not save the changes. The next thing we're going to tackle is we're going to add a couple of command buttons to an already existing form. We added a command button to a report earlier, and we had to use a macro to program that button to do what we needed it to do. It's a little bit different on a form. Let's open customer info form in layout view, because you can do this in layout or design view. And we're going to add 2 buttons right up here next to the heading information. So in your form layout design tab of the ribbon, you have your controls group. And the button, again, is the rectangle with the 4 X's on it. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to just click up in the report header section. Now notice it put the button somewhere else, but I can move it after the fact. But what's important is the command button wizard is enabled. And so when you place the button, it's saying, okay, you want the wizard to guide you through what to do with it. And so what we want to do here is the screen is separated into categories and action, right? So the first one is record navigation category, and you can see the actions: find a record, find next, go to the first, last, all of that stuff. Then we have a record operations category, and that's the category we want to use for this particular button. And we're going to choose in the actions, make sure add new record is already selected. In order to be able to add a new record to a form, you would either have to tab through all the fields and you would have to get, and it would just bring up the next record until you got to the last record. And then when you tab, it would bring up a blank one. That is not efficient. Or you would have to do the new record button down here in the navigation area. So a button is very handy. Buttons are very handy, particularly for data entry forms. So we're going to do next. Now, it gives you default text, add record, right? Or you can add a picture, and the picture would be represented in go to new, or you could show all pictures. Come back in here and take some time going through that. But we're going to just use text. And we'll leave it add record. And then we're going to do next. So if you need to do something with this button later, it's better that it has a name as opposed to command 12 or whatever number it gave you. So remember, for buttons, we're going to do CMD. That's for a command button, it's called. That's the prefix for a command button. And then we're going to call it add record. And finish. So now what I need to do is I just need to move that add record button, and it's not letting me put it where I want to put it. So I'm certainly going to move it away from the tab, and I'm going to flip to design view and see if I can make it go up in the header, the form header section that way. So I'm going to put that button right about there in the form header section. And I'm going to switch back to form view, and there it is. So we can test the button by clicking it, and it brings us a blank record. And now we're going to add another button here, and that button is close the form, right? So later on, when you see some access options, you can set it up so you don't have the tab showing here, right? You don't want somebody to have to go all the way over to the X to close the form. So another efficiency technique is the close form button, just like we did a close report one. So I'm going to go back to layout view. Actually, I'll do this one in design view just for variety's sake. And I'm going to go grab the button control, and I'm going to pop the button into the form header section. And the wizard comes up, and this one is going to be under form operations. If you want to take a moment, look through report operations, application. Quit application means get me out of access totally, and miscellaneous. So we're on form operations, and we're going to choose close form and do next. I'm going to stick with the text and next. And I'm going to name this one CMD close form and finish. So now I have my two buttons up there. What I like to do is align them by their top. So I'm using a selection net just to select those two buttons. I'm going to go to the Arrange tab, Align Top. And so go back to Form View and test your Close Form button and say yes when it prompts you to save the changes. So we added two buttons. Forms are begging for buttons. The end users that use forms would love to have buttons on the form because it makes their life a little bit easier. So far, all of the forms we've created have been data entry forms. We're going to create an informational form now, and later in the course, we're going to use that form in a macro. So let's go to create, and we'll just do this in form design. And the first thing I want to do is I want to put a label on this form. So remember, the label is the big A, little a, control. And I am going to draw a label almost the width of the detail section. I'm going to make it about this big, right? And in the label, I'm going to type today's featured client is, and then in parentheses, drum roll please. And I want that font to be a lot larger than it is. So I'm going to click on the box. I clicked away from the label box and I'm going to click back on it so it has the orange border around it. You don't have to select the text inside of it. You just need to have the label selected to impact the font. And I'm going to go to the Format tab on the ribbon and I'm going to make the font like 28 point. And then what I want to do is I want to make that label box wider so that the font is not word wrapping. In order to do that, I have to expand the size of my detail section. So I'm putting my mouse on the right border of detail, clicking and holding, and I'm going to drag it out to about 7¼ on the ruler up here. And then I can make that label box wider. It doesn't need to be quite as tall as it is. Now, before we add, we're going to also add a list box to this form. So before we do that, let's format this label. So you want to go to the Form Design tab. You can bring up the property sheet for this. This is one way of doing it. Actually, let's go to the Format tab on the ribbon. We don't have to worry about looking for the property. So the very end of the Format tab, we have Shape Fill and Shape Outline. You want to do the drop down for Shape Fill, and I'm going to choose like a medium orangey color. And then for the Shape Outline, I'm going to choose like the darkest orange color I can get. And then with the shape still selected, the label shape still selected, in the property sheet, I want to adjust the size of the outline, right? So, there's border style, border width, and that's what it's considering the outline as a border. So the border width defaults to hairline. I'm going to do the drop down and I'm going to go all the way to 6 point. And let's just switch over to form view and see what that looks like. So we have the label, we have the coloration and the border, and we're back in design view. So now we're going to make sure that nothing is selected. I just click anywhere on the grid. And we're going to go back to the Form Design tab. And we want to use the list box control. So I'm going to open the controls gallery. And the list box is this one. So I'm going to select it. And I'm going to drag the list box so it's about this wide and this tall. And when I let go, the wizard comes up. Now, just want to show you something real quick. So don't cancel. Don't do what I'm going to do. Just watch. I'm going to cancel this and get rid of that list box. And this drop down next to the controls group, notice that use control wizards is already shaded. The wizard's wand before the text use control wizards is already shaded, meaning that the control wizards are on. If I go and deselect control wizards, and then I place a list box, let me show you what happens so you'll know how to resolve it if it ever happens to you. So I'm going to grab the list box again and I'm going to draw it. And when I let go, no wizard comes up because I disabled them. So it expects you to program that. So if that ever happens, you just need to go to the drop down and click on use control wizards. You would have to delete your control, go to the drop down, click on use control wizards, and then put your control back in. And the wizard will pop up when you stop drawing it. So that will happen on occasion. Okay, so the wizard creates a list box which displays a list of values you can choose from. How do you want your list box to get its values? We want the list box to get the values from another table or query. Your only other choice is you're going to type them in. And we're going to have our company names in this list box, so why recreate the wheel? So I'm going to do next, and I'm going to select TBL customers and next. And the only field I want is company name, so I'm going to move that over to the right. And then I'm going to do next. In my list box, I like the names in ascending order, sorted in ascending order. So I did that on the sort screen, and I'm going to do next. So it shows you an example of the data. You know, we have those two Astro advertising company names, but they're different cities and states. So what you can do on this screen is you can make sure that the entire company name shows in the list box by just widening the margin there for that column. And I'm going to go next. And the label doesn't matter because we're not going to use a label on this one. So we'll just do finish. First thing I'm going to do is click that company name label and press delete. And I don't think my list box needs to be this tall. Might need to be a little bit wider despite me adjusting the column in there. Part of it is doing it in there, and part of it is making sure your box is wide enough to support the width of a client name. And so at this point, I'm going to go back to Form View. And I see my list box doesn't need to be quite as tall because I can see the beginnings of another one. So I'm going to go back to Design View. Maybe Layout View would be better so I can see the underlying data. And then I'm going to go back to Design View. So for the list box, I'm going to go to Shape Fill. I'm going to use the same color that I used before for the label. And I'm going to go to Shape Outline and make sure that's the same color as well. And then I'm also going to make that outline, we'll leave it thin. We'll leave it hairline. So there's nothing to be done really on this form other than selecting a featured client of the day. So later on, I'll show you how to make this form come up when you open the database. And we'll do that via a macro. But for right now, let's save the form. And we're going to call it FRM Featured Client. And click OK. And now we can close it. There's a specialized form that you can create in Access known as a switchboard. A switchboard gives you the ability to navigate easily to multiple objects. So it is an efficiency technique. It is at its root a form. Now, in order to create a switchboard in Access, you have to add the switchboard manager to your quick access toolbar. It doesn't reside anywhere within Access, not on the ribbon, anywhere at all. So if you notice on my screen, my quick access toolbar is underneath my ribbon, and to the right of it, there's a down arrow button. We're going to go ahead and click that down arrow button, and almost at the bottom, select More Commands. So this is so we can get the switchboard manager into Access. On the right side is what's currently on your quick access toolbar. I'm going to click once on the last item there, and I'll explain why in a minute. And on the left side, it defaults to popular commands. Well, Switchboard Manager is not a popular command, and it's not on the ribbon, so I'm going to do the drop down next to popular commands, and I'm going to choose commands not in the ribbon. So I'll have an easier time finding it. The list underneath commands not in the ribbon, I'm going to click one time anywhere in that list, and I'm going to type the letter S. It only allows for a one-character scroll, so now you're in the S portion of the list, and I'm going to continue to scroll down until I see Switchboard Manager. When I see it, I'm going to double-click it, and it moves it from the left to the right. Well, it doesn't move it. It copies it from the left to the right. So the reason why we clicked on Redo is we wanted Switchboard Manager to be the last icon on our quick access toolbar. So it goes after whatever is selected over on the right. At the bottom, we're going to click OK. That is known as a one and done. Once you add Switchboard Manager to your quick access toolbar, you'll never have to go through that process again. So now when we look at the quick access toolbar, and I'm just scrolling down a little bit here so I can see my forms and reports, we'll see that last button is Switchboard Manager. Go ahead and click it. Whenever you use it for the first time in a database, it will say the Switchboard Manager was unable to find a valid switchboard in this database. Would you like to create one? Yes, sirree, we do. So you're going to click on yes, and the Switchboard Manager dialog box pops up. So it comes with a main switchboard, which is the default switchboard, but you can create your own. So on the right side, we're going to click on New. And we're going to call this switchboard Forms Switchboard. And we'll click OK. And then we're going to click on Forms Switchboard, and let's make that the default. Whatever the default one is the one that you'll access back in the program. So on the right side, I'm going to click Make Default. And then on the right side, I'm going to click on Edit so we can add items to the Forms Switchboard. On the right side, click the New button, and you're going to type Enter New Order. And the command, we're going to go to the drop down, and we're going to open Form in Add mode. If we want to enter a new order, the form has to be in Add mode. So I'm going to go ahead and click that. And then the last thing to do is which form. So I'm going to do the form drop down, and I'm going to select FRM Orders. And I'm going to click OK. Now we're going to add 3 more switchboard items. So we're going to do New again. The second one is Enter New Customer. Go to your command drop down and select Open Form in Add mode again. And then the form is going to be FRM Customer Info. And we're going to OK. 2 more. So New again. This one is Enter New Employee. Same command, form in Add mode. And then we're going to use the FRM Employees form. And OK. And our last new one is going to be called Close Database. And the command is going to be Exit Application. And we're going to OK. And then we can close this Edit Switchboard page and close the Switchboard Manager. So how does this work? Well, 2 things happened in your navigation pane when we did that Switchboard Manager setup. The first thing that happened is it created a table called Switchboard Items, which you'll probably ignore forever. The second thing it did is it created the switchboard, which is a form. So I'm going to go ahead and collapse my tables and my queries just so my forms and reports are showing over there. And under forms, you'll notice the last one is just called switchboard. It's going to bring up whatever the default switchboard is. We're going to double click switchboard, and voila, there's your form switchboard. This is what's cool about it. And you'll see later when we do some options for the database where we can hide the navigation pane, right? And just have the switchboard come up. If the person's job in the database is just entering new orders, customers, or employees, this could be the way they work. The switchboard will stay open until you close it. So when I click on the checkbox in front of Enter New Order, it gives me an order form where it's ready for me to input data. I can go back to the switchboard, Enter New Customer, same thing. Go back to the switchboard, Enter New Employee, same thing. And go back to the switchboard, and this time you're going to click on Close Database. And then it's going to close your database, and you'll be backstage and you'll be able to reopen it under Recent. So go ahead and close the database and reopen it. Now I'm going to challenge you. I'd like you to create a new switchboard, name it Report Switchboard, make it the default switchboard, and what you're going to do is you're going to add the 3 reports that we have in our navigation pane separately. So 3 items on that report switchboard. You don't have to do exit application on that. Go ahead and pause and set up that switchboard. The last type of form that I want to show you is known as a navigation form. But since I challenged you to create your report switchboard, I have mine open on the screen so you can see what I came up with. I'm going to go ahead and close that switchboard. So another way, and it's another efficiency and navigation feature, there's another type of form in Access called a navigation form. So let's go to the Create tab. And in the Forms group, we're going to click the drop down next to Navigation. And let's select Vertical Tabs Left. So it comes up in Layout View. We can close the field list on the right. We don't need that at all. And this is a drag and drop operation. So this is really kind of cool. We're going to drag and drop that report orders by customer directly onto that Add New placeholder. And then we're going to grab Order Summary Report and drag it to Add New. And we're going to, last but not least, grab Products and drag that to Add New. Now, since we're in Layout View, let's change that title at the top from Navigation Form. We're going to just say My Reports. And we're going to get rid of that little icon picture next to it. Right? And so now, also, since we're in Layout View, we can get rid of the RPT on those tabs in front of our report names, and we can actually make them plain English by putting spaces in between. So take a moment to do that like I'm doing. You might have to double click to get in there to get to it. But we're making it look a little bit more user friendly. Nobody needs to see the RPT stuff, as a label on anything in here like that. It's just really for the objects. And so when we go ahead and let's save this form and call it FRM Reports Navigation and click OK. So now we can change the view. Let's go to Form View. And this is what it looks like, right? So you can see all of these reports. If I click on Orders by Customer, it shows me the customer orders report. If I click on Order Summaries, there's that one. And last but not least, if I click on Products, there's that one. So another form called a navigation form that can help you be a little bit more efficient in how you work in Access. We can go ahead and close that form. So this lesson is about designing macros to automate database tasks. The first thing we're going to do is create a macro to open a database object. We had a little bit of experience creating a macro earlier when we added a command button to a report and used a macro to program the button to close the report when it's clicked. Now we're going to use what I consider to be a very cool type of macro to open a database object. And that cool type of macro is known as an AutoExec macro. I mentioned it earlier in this course when we were reviewing the Northwind database. An AutoExec macro is a macro that executes or runs when the database is opened. And what we're going to do with it is we're going to have it open that featured client form that we created earlier. That's just an informational form with a list box. And so you can only have one AutoExec macro in a database. So what we're going to do now is we're going to go to the Create tab of the ribbon. And over to the right in the macro encode group, you're going to just click on the macro button. And when we get into the macro design area, we'll just have that box there that we saw earlier. And what we're going to do is we're going to do the drop down, and the command that we want to use here, or the action, I should say, these are called actions, is we're going to use the open form action. You have to tell it the name of the form, and there's a drop down to the right of the form name field. And we named that form featured client, so we're going to select it. We're going to have it open in form view. We're not going to do filters or conditions or any of that kind of stuff. So that's the action that we want to happen. Now, to make this an AutoExec macro, we have to name it AutoExec. And that would be a capital A and a capital E. And the thing is we're not going to use the typical macro prefix of MCR for this. We're just simply going to name it AutoExec. So I'm going to right click on the macro tab and choose save. And I'm going to type capital A auto, capital E exec, and press enter or click OK. And then I'm going to close the macro. Now, in order to see this work, you're going to have to close your database and reopen it. So go ahead and do that. Because of the name of the macro, Access knows to execute it upon you opening the database. So that form automatically displays. Let's go ahead and close that form. You'll notice now that our navigation pane has the macro section that's populated. Now we're going to create another macro that's going to use a message box to inform users. So let's go back to our Create tab and back to Macro. And we're going to use the Open Form action again from the drop-down. This one is actually a pretty cool one to do. The form that we're going to want to open is the Customer Info form. And again, form view, all of that, we're going to leave all of the defaults there the way they are. And then we're going to add another action. So once the form opens, that would be the first step. We're going to add another step by doing the Add New Action dropdown. And on this list of actions, we're going to select Message Box. So the message is what we want displayed to the end user. And we're going to use a message that says, please check to see if customer exists before adding a new record. We'll leave the beep at yes, so when the message box pops up, if it's a warning or informational message, it will beep. For the type, we're going to do the drop down and we're going to make it information. And the title, which will display in the title bar of the message box, is please check customer. And I put an exclamation point just for a little drama. We're going to save this macro. This time we're going to use the MCR prefix. That's standard unless it's an AutoExec macro, really. So MCR. And this is going to be, the macro would be message box. We'll just call it message box. So we're going to click OK. And we can run the macro while it's still open. And by the way, you have these two steps in here, open form and message box. And if you put them in the wrong order, you can use the green arrows on the right to move them around if that ever happens. And you can also delete them by just selecting one and clicking delete on your keyboard if you put in something that you decide you don't need. So we're going to just use the run button. And we have to save it again. And now it brings up, please check to see if customer exists before adding a new record. So anytime this form is accessed by the end user, that message box will pop up. So we're going to click OK on that. And we're going to close all by clicking one of the tabs at the top. Now we're going to create a macro that's going to be generated by a button click from a report that's going to automate a parameter query. So we're going to add a button to the order summaries report. Let's go ahead and open that in Design View and grab the button from the control group. And we're going to draw a button on the right side of the report header section. Now, when you let go, the button is still selected. It has the orange border going around it. I'm going to go to the All tab in the Property sheet, and I'm going to name the button CMD, and it's going to be Open Query. And then the caption, which is the text that appears on the button itself, we're going to just name that Open Query in plain English. Then we're going to go to the Event tab in the Property sheet, and we're going to access the macro builder for the on-click event. So we're going to go all the way to the right and click the ellipsis button, and then you can double-click macro builder. So this is going to be an Open Query macro. So we're going to do the drop down and select the Open Query action. And the query we're going to open is orders param. And that's all we want to do when the button is clicked. It is a parameter query, so the prompts for the order dates will appear. And this can be run from within a report. So we're going to go ahead and save. We can use the ribbon if you like to save this macro. And we're going to close it. And we're going to save order summary report and then go over to report view. And we can use the button in report view. So when we click Open Query, we should get a prompt for the start date. And let's just put in 6/1/2010. And we'll press enter or click OK. And we'll use 6/30/2010 for our end date. And press OK. So now we have both the report open and the orders parameter query open. You can go ahead and right click on either of those tabs and close all. If it asks you to save changes, say yes. Sometimes you'll want to create forms that I like to refer to as smart forms, meaning that they hide certain form controls when they're not needed, and then they display them when they do. So let's start this by taking a look at the customers table. I'm going to just double click it, and notice we want to pay attention to two of the fields here, active and employee. If a client is inactive, they'll have a 0 and they're not assigned to any employee. So if we're looking at this data on a form, we only want to see the employee field when a client is active. And we're going to set that up using a macro. So we can go ahead and close the customers table. And we're going to go down and open up our customer info form. And we can open it in layout view. So this is the form where we use the tabs. So when we go to the status tab, we have email and active. And we want to add another field. We want to add the employee field here. So on the form layout design ribbon, I'm going to bring up my field list, add existing fields. And I'm going to right click on employee and add field to view. And then I'm just using the down arrow on my keyboard to move that field down, I'm going to use my right arrow to move it across a little bit as well. And now what I'm going to do is save the form. So if we take the form to form view, and we see when active is true, it's showing the employee. And I'm going to use the record navigator to go to the next record. And when we get to the 5th record, we have active as false. And we don't want that employee field to show. So we're going to program a macro to take care of that. So now we're going to go to Design View. And on our status page, we're going to click on the active text box, not the label, the text box. So this trigger to make an object on a form invisible is what we're going to be doing using this macro. It's triggered by having another object, like another text box, selected. So when we click that active text box, we're going to program the on-click event in the property sheet. So I'm on the event tab, and I'm going to go to the vertical ellipsis and go to macro builder. And for this one, we're going to do the drop down, and we're going to select if. So it's an if-then conditional statement. It'll only do it if the condition we put in the if box is true. So we're going to start by saying the active cell, so the active field, the active text field, we're going to type a square bracket and then start typing active, and the field, which is a text box, will show on the list. I'm going to double click it. And then we're going to type $, false. So if the active field is populated with false, then if you look to the right, there's a then statement. And we're going to add a new action. The new action we're looking for in the list is set value. So do your drop down in the add new action, the one that's right underneath the if statement, and look for set value, and you won't find it. Certain actions don't show in that list. Actions that could cause stuff to become invisible, actions that could potentially impact the data. So what you have to do is on that macro design tab, you have to click on the show all actions icon in the show hide group. And now when you go to the add new action drop down, you'll be able to find set value. That's the action we're looking for. So it has 2 arguments, item and expression. In the item box, we're going to do a square bracket and start typing employee. So we'll see the employee text box, and I'm going to double click it. Then we're going to type a dot after the closing bracket, just a period. And then we're going to start typing the word visible, and that will show on the list, and you can double click it. So if active box is populated with false, then set the value of the employee field to visible, right? And then that sounds the opposite of what we want. So we're going to use the expression field to say, no, we don't want it visible. So you could just type that in the expression field. So it should say if active equal false, and remember the then is over to the right, then set the value of the employee field to the opposite of visible by using that expression no. So we're going to just go ahead and save this macro. Notice you don't get to name the embedded ones, the ones that you attach to events like on click or double click. You don't name them. It gives it the name of what it's doing, right? So we're going to go ahead and close it. And then we're going to go to our customer form in form view, navigate to record 5. And when you click on the status tab, click in the active false field and the employee field will disappear. So that's kind of pretty cool. Go ahead and save your form and close it. The next macro we're going to build is going to be to validate data entry in a form. I'm going to explain this one as we go because you'll be exposed to different actions that we haven't used before. So I'll explain it as we go. And what we're going to do is we're going to open the customer info form in design view and make sure your property sheet is open and the selection type should be form. We're going to create a macro based off the before update event. So you can go to the event tab or the all tab. So the before update event on a form is before the record on the form is saved. So when you're inputting records on a form, you'll start like in a company name field, tab, address, city, state, zip, phone. Once you put in phone and you tab, it will bring up a new record and the previous one is now saved. So we want to get this macro to execute before the data on the form is saved. So we're going to use the ellipsis button to the right of before update, and we're going to go into our macro builder. We're going to use an if block again. So if then. And if we're going to type is and then start typing the letter N, and is null will show up. It's a function. We're going to double click that function and we're going to start typing city, and we'll see the city field and we can double click it from the list. Now type a closing parenthesis. So what this is saying is if the city field on this particular form is empty and you bypass the city field, you fill in the state, you fill in the zip, and then you press tab again, it's going to start this macro. So that's just one step. So if the city is empty, what do we want it to do? We're going to go to the add new action drop down right underneath the if statement. And we're going to choose cancel event. That means don't save the information on the form. Just don't update the form. Don't save the information. Instead of saving the information, what we would like it to do is we would like it to display a message box. So we're going to add another action, the message box action. And the message is going to be the city field is required. And we're going to make this a warning with an exclamation point type of message box. And the title is going to be missing required information. So that will show in the title bar of the message box. After the message displays, as a convenience factor, we're going to add another action. So let's go to our add new action dropdown. And this one is go to control. So we're telling the end user the city field is required. It would be really nice if we put their cursor back in the city field after they see that message. So for control name, we're going to just type city. It will show up on the list and we're going to double click it. So this is validating data entry. It's going to check the form before it saves the record on the screen to make sure the city field is populated. If it's not going to update the form. It's not going to save that record. It's going to display a message box letting the user know that the field is required, and it's going to place their insertion point in the city field. So let's go ahead and save this macro and close it. And we're going to take our form to form view and test it. So Let's go down to the record navigation area, and we're going to click the new record icon. And we're going to just put in ABCD for a company name. We're going to fill in address 1, and that's going to be 123 Main Street, and we're using ST for street. Purposely skip the city field. We're going to put in California as our state. Zip code we'll use 93854. We don't need a phone number. We're not asking for one, but we'll put one in anyway. So we'll just put in 555, that's our area code, and then 555-4321. And now when we press tab, we're going to see the message box. Missing required information, the city field is required. When I click OK to get rid of that message box, notice the insertion point is in the city field. That is the go-to control action that we added at the end. So we're going to just type in Sacramento, and I'm going to just press my tab key. Once I'm in the phone field, I'm going to press it again, and now it lets me save that record. So it's testing to make sure that a field is populated, and it won't let you save the record if that field is not populated. Pretty cool macro. In this extensive module, you learned a host of advanced form design techniques, including how to design complex forms like subforms and navigation forms. Also, we designed a split form. We also got into how to set default values on form fields and how to adjust the tab order. We also added buttons and drop-down lists for navigation. Then we created the specialized form known as a switchboard, which allows you to easily navigate between different database objects. We went on to design a host of macros to automate database tasks, including macros to open and close database objects. We used message boxes to inform users. We automated parameter queries with macros. We hid field controls with macros, and we use macros to validate data entry. Remember, this is where we set our AutoExec macro that opens a form when we launch the database. Our last module in this course will introduce you to Access Visual Basic for complex automation. You'll get to do a little bit of coding. We're going to move on to linking tables to ensure your database is secure, and then how to customize some database options. Our first lesson in this last module is Visual Basic for Applications, commonly known as VBA. It's Microsoft's programming language that can be used across the Microsoft applications. It's automatically included in the Microsoft applications. The initial examples we're going to be doing with Visual Basic for Applications, we're going to use it to secure forms with passwords, create user input boxes, and use logic programming to interpret conditions. There are two basic types of modules, which are the windows that hold the code in VBA, that we're going to be working with. For the three examples listed on the slide, we're going to be using class modules, and the code is attached to form or report events as a trigger. For example, when the form loads, that is an event. Then we're going to do an example with a standard module where the code is not attached to form or report events. And by the way, standard modules are the only ones that will display in the navigation pane in Access. We'll be using a notepad document that's in the video description, and it's named VBA Code for Access 2019. Go ahead and get that document open, and then that way you won't have to type in all this code. We'll be able to copy and paste it, and then I'll explain what the code is doing. Before we get into coding, we want to modify our switchboard default. So go ahead and on your quick access toolbar, click on your switchboard manager, and we made our report switchboard to default. We're going to click on Forms Switchboard, and on the right side on the bottom, click on Make Default. And now we'll close Switchboard Manager. So we're going to make the employees form secure. Few users that we're going to give the password to will be the only people in the company that can add or edit employee information. So let's go ahead and open the employees form in Design View. And we're going to attach this code to the onload event. If your property sheet is not open on the right-hand side, you can go to the Tools group on the ribbon and open it by clicking the Property Sheet button. We're going to be using onload event. So click in the text box to the right of onload. I'm on the Event tab in the Property Sheet. And that means when the form is loaded into memory, when the form is opened up. And all the way to the right, we're going to click on the ellipsis. This time we're going to select Code Builder. So what it does, it brings you into Visual Basic for Applications Editor window. And notice we don't have a ribbon interface up here. It's the old school menu bar and toolbars. On the left side, you have your Project Explorer window, and yours may or may not look like mine, but it will say the name of your file. And it will show you what are known as the class objects underneath it. If you don't have any class objects showing, that's fine. You will. So it created what's called a sub procedure. So we were on the employees form. So it's saying private sub, and it's based on the form load event, and it gives you an end sub statement. If you have a sub statement, you have to have an end sub statement or you will get an error. I'm going to press enter after the parentheses, and I'm going to bring up the notepad file. And the first block of code in here, we're going to select from the top all the way down until above the dividing equal signs. So just select what I have selected on my screen, and we'll talk about it after we get it into Visual Basic. So now I'm going to hover over my Access icon, and I see that I have both Access and the Visual Basic Editor window open. I'm going to just go back to the Editor window, and right where my insertion point is, I'm going to do Control V as in Victor to paste, or you can use paste up here. So let's talk about this code before we test it. So the name of the sub procedure is form load. Everything that's in green is known as a comment. So comment lines do not execute or run when the code is run. They're used to describe what the code is going to do. So this is code to password protect a form, and it's used on the onload event. Then we're declaring a variable. A variable is a temporary storage unit in your computer's memory that stores information. We use the dim keyword to declare a variable, and we're just calling it passwd, abbreviation for password. We could call it anything. And then we're telling it what to populate password with. It's going to be an input box that says enter password, and its title bar will say restricted form. The next set of comments are saying the next block of code here is going to check to see if there is any entry made to the input box or if the cancel button is pressed. If no entry is made or the cancel button is pressed, then it's going to exit the sub procedure and it's not going to open the form. So it's saying here, if password, right, is blank or password is empty, meaning cancel is pressed, Then it's going to bring up a message box that says no input provided. It's going to have an information icon in that message box. And its title bar is going to say required data. And again, it will exit the sub procedure, meaning it will not open the form. Then we have more comments. If the correct password is entered, it's going to open the employee's form. And if an incorrect password is entered, it will give a message box and exit the sub procedure, and that will cause it to not open the form as well. So we hard coded a password here. It says if passwd equals learn it with an exclamation point and a capital L, then open the form, the employee's form, in normal view. Or else, so meaning if the password is not learn it with the exclamation point, it's going to display a message box that says, sorry, you don't have access to this form. It's going to have an OK button in the message box, and its title bar is going to say important information. So we're ready to test it, but we want to check to make sure there are no errors in our code. So we're going to click the save icon, and then we're going to go to the debug menu and choose the top choice, compile office supplies. When you compile your code, it's checking it line by line for errors. And if there are any errors found, it would be notifying you in a message box. Now we're going to switch back over to Access and check our code. So the easiest way to get back over to Access and leave the Visual Basic editor window open is to go to the first icon on the toolbar, and it looks like the access icon. So when you click that, it will take you right back into your form design screen. You'll notice the onload event now says event procedure, and we're going to save our form and close it. Now we're going to test it. Let's open the form. And you should get the restricted form in the message bar, and enter password is the prompt. So let's type in the correct password, capital L learn it with an exclamation point. And when you click OK, it will open the form. Let's close the form again and reopen it. This time we're going to press the cancel button, and we get the required data, no input provided, so it won't open the form unless you have the correct password. Go ahead and click OK on that message. Now let's test it again using our switchboard form. So go ahead and open your switchboard form. And on the form switchboard, we're going to click on Enter New Employee, and there's your prompt. You can go ahead and just do the X and close the switchboard. The next example of a class module we're going to use is to create a user input box. So let's do this. Let's open the featured client form in Design View. And this is the form that we attach to our AutoExec macro, so it opens every time we open the database. And we're going to go over, and what we want to do is we're going to do this on the unload event as well in the property sheet. So go ahead and go to your vertical ellipsis and double click Code Builder. So the same thing, private sub form load. It has a sub procedure already waiting for us. And we're going to bring up the Notepad document again. So in Notepad, under the first divider line, we're going to select from the comments all the way through the end sub statement. And actually, we don't even need the end sub statement because it gave us one in there. So we're just going to select from below the divider line to above end sub as shown on my screen. And we're going to do Control C. And I'm going to hover back over my access icon and switch over to my editor window. And I'm going to just paste that code, Control V. So this is code to create a user input box. It's used on the unload event. We have the comments in there. Always use comments to describe the intent of your code. And then we're declaring username as a variable. And we're telling it that username equals whatever is put into the input box that comes up. So an input box is going to appear, and it's going to say enter your first name, and the title bar of it will say your name. And once OK is clicked on that input box, then a message box will pop up that will say welcome and whatever the username is that was put in the input box, followed by an exclamation point. And notice this is text, so it has to be in double quotes. And we're concatenating the word welcome and a space with the username. And then we're concatenating that with the exclamation point. So we're going to do the same thing here. We're going to go up and we're going to save. And then we're going to go to the debug menu and compile Office Supplies. We got no errors. So let's switch back over to Access using the first button. And we're going to close this file, this form rather. And now when we launch the form, when we load it, so go ahead and open the form, you should get the input box. It has the title bar that says your name, and the prompt is enter your first name. And so I'm going to type in my first name, going to press OK, and I get a message box that says welcome with my first name and the exclamation point. You can go ahead and click OK. Now I'd like you to pause the video and take a moment. You're going to close this featured client form. And then I'd like you to close the database and then reopen it, since that's part of the AutoExec macro. You should still get that prompt to enter your first name. And I'm going to type my name in again. Click OK. Click OK on my message box. And then I'm going to close that form. Now we're going to write code that uses logic programming to interpret conditions. Before we get started, let's open the customer info form. So I have it open in form view, and the code that we're going to write will tell it when we add a new record using this form, if the state is Oregon, change the detail background color to a specific color. If the state is not Oregon, we want the background color to be a different color. That's how we're going to start this code. And then we're going to come back and add on to it so that it can test multiple conditions. So let's put the form in design view. And instead of using the onload event like we've done previously, we're going to attach the VBA code to a specific field. So let's select the state field on the form, and we're going to use its before update event. So I'm on the event tab in the property sheet. Go ahead and click in before update. This means that the code will execute or run once the state field is exited. So typically on a form, when you're doing data entry, you're using your tab key. So the example would be when you tab out of the state field and then the zip field is active. That's when this code will execute. Go ahead and click your ellipsis button in the before update event field and double click Code Builder. So now we have the framework for our private sub procedure. It's based on the state field, and underscore before update is the event that we chose. So cancel as integer is known as an argument for the before update event. When we recorded a macro earlier, to validate data entry, we said if the state field is not populated, don't proceed to saving the record. That is the cancel event. And here it's putting it as the integer data type, so that if you were going to be using that event, the cancel event, you would mark true to make sure it cancels it to a -1 and false as a 0. But we're not going to be canceling this procedure. So it's just part of the framework of the before update event that it will always give you that option. I'm going to click at the end of that line and press enter. And I'm going to go ahead and bring up the Notepad document, the code for Access 2019. Now, the first block of code that we're going to use is going to interpret one condition. So I am going to select from the comment code to use logic programming to interpret one condition all the way down through the end if statement. And I'm going to copy that. Now back in my Visual Basic Editor window, I'm going to just go ahead and paste, and we'll talk about the code. So this is set up to interpret one condition. Put a code line there for your future reference that it's used on the before update event of the state field and FRM customers info. And this is similar to the if function in Excel. If state, notice it's a field name, so it's in the square brackets, equals Oregon. We're using the 2-character state abbreviations, and it's text, so it needs to be in double quotes. If that is true, then change the detail back color to a specific color that's being referenced by its number. If that is not true, it will run the code after the else statement. So if the state is not Oregon, then it's going to change the detail back color to a specific other color. Whenever you have an if statement, you'll also hear it referred to as an if block, meaning block of code. It has to have an end if statement, just like a sub statement has to have an end sub statement. Let's go ahead and save this code. And then we're going to go to debug and compile it. So great, no errors. I'm going to switch back over to Access now. You'll notice in the property sheet for the before update event, it now displays event procedure. Now we're going to test this procedure. Let's take the form to form view. And we're going to click the Add Record command button that we added earlier. Let's give a company name of Turf Team. For the address, and I'm going to just use my tab key, I'm going to put 1 Turf Way. The city is going to be Salem. The state is going to be Oregon. And as soon as I press tab and the zip field has the focus now, it changed that detail background to that specific blue color. Since the only thing that's required on this field is the state field, we're going to go ahead and click the Add Record button again. And this time we're going to put in a company name of Sam's Smithery with an address of 25 Smith Street, and I'm using ST. For the city, let's put in Sacramento, and this time the state is going to be California. And when you press tab, you get the alternate detail background color. Go ahead and press tab a couple of more times. It'll bring up a new add record form, and it won't change the detail background until you populate and exit the state field. Let's go ahead and take the form back to design view, and we're going to add on to the code. So click in your before update box and go to your vertical ellipsis, and it'll take you back to the code window. Now, before we add on to this code so it tests more than one condition, we want to keep the code that we already have there. We just don't want it to execute. So we're going to do what's called commenting it out. At the beginning of each line of code, just type an apostrophe. And notice when you go down to the next line, it will change the preceding line to that green color, which denotes a comment. Make sure you're at the beginning of each line when you type your apostrophe. And just comment out through the end if line. You want to leave your end subline the way it is. Now I'm going to click after the end of end if. So that whole block of code and its comments are now called commented out, meaning when you execute, it's not going to run that code. So we're going to go back over to Notepad. We have a variation of this code. So the next block that is down, we're going to start selecting from code to use logic programming to interpret multiple conditions all the way through end if. And you're going to go ahead and copy that and paste it into your Visual Basic editor window. Let me get back over there. And you can do it right where your insertion point is. So let's review this code. It's going to interpret multiple conditions. So it starts the same as the previous code. If state equals Oregon, then it's going to give it the same detail back color. This time we have an else if statement. The else if statement allows you to interpret another condition. So the first condition is in the if statement. Now we have the second condition. If the state is California, then it's going to give the detail back color a different color. And finally, we have our else statement. And notice the comment right next to it. That would be for all other states other than Oregon or California. It's going to have the detail back color that we saw in the previous exercise when we typed in a California record. So let's go ahead and save, go to debug and compile to make sure there's no errors. And we're going to switch back over to access. So now we've updated this event procedure. Let's take our form to form view, add a record. This time I'd like you to go directly to the city field, and we're going to type in Portland this time. The state is Oregon. And when I tab, I get the blue color like we saw in the previous example. Click Add Record. This time we're going to go directly to the city field, and we're going to type San Diego, tab, California, tab, and you'll notice California has a different detail back color. Let's do one more. We're going to go to Add Record. This time we're going to put in New York as the city, NY as the state, and when we tab, we get a different back color. So Oregon has its own color, California does, all other states would have this color. Now take a moment and pause the video, and you can use your record navigation to go back to the previous records and finish filling them out by giving them company name, address, zips, and phones. And you can just make up that information. When you're done, go ahead and close this form. Now, before we get into our last VBA code example, I'd like you to scroll down in your navigation pane and notice there is no modules object showing. That's because the code that we've used so far has been in class modules. Again, a reminder, that's code that's attached to a form or report event. Now we're going to write code in what's known as a standard module, and that's the only type of module that will show and create the modules object here. So we're going to do this from the Create tab of the ribbon. All the way to the right-hand side, you'll see the macros and code group. We're going to select module. So just go ahead and give it a click, and it opens your VBA editor window. Now, a couple of things happened. In your Project Explorer screen, you'll see that you now have a modules folder, and the module we're currently in is named by default Module 1. We're going to change the name of that module in just a little bit. We don't have the framework like a sub and an end sub statement because it doesn't know what we want to do in the module. So we have to create the entire framework as well as the code within it. Let's go over to our notepad, and we're going to grab the very last block of code, starting with example of VBA code that is in a standard module, all the way through the end, and copy it. Navigate back to your Visual Basic Editor window and go ahead and paste the code. So let's review what the code is doing. Again, this is in a standard module, which means it's not going to run based off of a form or a report event. So we're going to have to make this code run. The reason why you would use standard modules, for example, there's many reasons, but one of the greatest reasons is that you may want to have blocks of code that you want to use on multiple forms and reports across different databases. Since it's in a standard module, it won't execute unless you run it, but you can always copy and paste it to a class module, so then it executes based on an event. So you can consider it sort of like a warehouse of code. So this sub procedure, we've named it date time, and we have the open and close parentheses behind it. We're declaring a variable, again, a temporary holding facility in your computer's memory, and just calling it DT. Remember, variables can be called whatever. And then we're going to tell it that that variable equals now, which is Access's way of giving the current date and time. And then we're going to have a message box that says the current date and time is, and we've concatenated the results of our DT variable, which is now. And then it's going to have the current date and time as the title bar of the message box. So again, this is not event driven. We're going to have to cause it to happen. The first thing I'd like us to do is save it. And when you go to save it, it's going to prompt you for a module name. And we use the lowercase prefix of MOD for modules. And we're just going to call this one date with a capital D and time with a capital T. And I'm going to press enter. And notice it updates the name over to the left in the Project Explorer window. Now we want to go to debug and compile it. Make sure there are no errors. Now, since it's not attached to an event, how are we going to run this? Well, on the toolbar, you'll see the little play button. Looks like a play button on a cassette player. And you can use that. If you hover over it, it says run sub meaning sub-procedure, or user form. There's also a shortcut key, function key 5 will do it. I'm going to go ahead and click that button, and it just brings up the message box with the title bar saying current date and time, and it gives you the current date and time. And you can click OK on that. And I'm going to go ahead and close the code window. Now, when you scroll down to the bottom of your navigation pane, you'll see that we have the modules object showing, and our standard module mod date and time is showing down there. If you open it in design view, it takes you back into the Visual Basic editor. Go ahead and close that. Now I'm going to show you how you can use that code elsewhere. Since it's not attached to event, we're not going to want to go into the Visual Basic editor and do F5 or press the play button, because that's just inconvenient. So let's open our orders form in design view, and we're going to go over to the onload event, and you're going to do the ellipsis and double click code builder. So what I've done in here is, now what you're going to do is just click your mod date and time. I've already done it. And you're going to copy not the sub or the in sub statement, but go ahead and copy from dim DT to the message box line. So when we went into the form load event for orders, right, it created the private sub, so it already created the sub procedure and the end sub statement. We just needed to paste this data in. And now we're going to save, go to debug and compile, and you can close your Visual Basic editor. We're going to close the orders form, and now you're going to reopen it, and when you open it, it's going to show the current date and time. So you could copy that code to different forms and reports as necessary and tie it to events, even if it's in a different database. So let's go back to that module date and time for a moment. Just open it in design view, right? If we had more than one database file open, it would show in the Project Explorer window. We only have one open. So it is possible to copy from this module into another database object. Go ahead and close the code window again. One of the best things you can do to ensure table data security is to create linked tables. And you do that by splitting your database into a front end and a back end. The view that we're in right now is going to end up being the front end when we do this. So this is another one that'll be easier to explain as we go. We're going to go to the Database Tools tab on the ribbon. And in the Move Data group, we're going to click on Access Database. And it brings up the Database Splitter wizard. It gives you an explanation on there of what it's going to do. Basically, it's going to create a back-end database that only contains the tables. Typically, you would want to put that back-end copy of the database in a directory that only a very few people have access to. In the meantime, in the front end, the part that we're in right now, it's going to make all of those tables linked tables. And it may appear that people will be able to go in and change things, including table design stuff, entering records, but they really won't be able to. They would have to go to the back end to be able to modify the table design or table data in that way. So we're going to go ahead and click on Split Database, and it will take you to your working directory. It's going to use the same file name, but it's going to append it with _BE, which represents backend. Go ahead and click on split. So it lets you know your database has successfully split, and we're going to click OK. As soon as we do that, again, this is the front end. So notice that the table icons are changed. They look like they're links, and they are now linked tables. So these tables actually reside in the back end. If you hover your mouse over TBL customers, you'll see the path to that table is to the back end database with the same name. Let's open customers table in design view. So it lets you know that this table is a linked table whose design cannot be modified. If you want to add or remove fields or change their properties or data types, you have to do so in the source database, which is the back end one. It asks you if you want to open it anyway. So we're going to say yes. And in design view, let's go to the company name field and change that field to a number data type. It makes it look like we can actually really do this. But when we go to save that table, we're going to get the message that says it can't save property changes for linked tables. Do you want to continue anyway? We're going to say yes. And we're going to close that table. And if we were to reopen it in design view, go ahead and say yes on that prompt. You see that it did not change that data type. You would have to be in the back end in order to make that happen. Go ahead and close that table. The next thing we want to do is navigate to our working directory and open the _BE backend portion of this database. Go ahead and pause the video and get that one open. When this one opens, you'll notice you have that security warning in the yellow band at the top. You're going to go ahead and enable content. And you'll notice that the only objects in this backend are the tables. So if I right click on TBL customers and go to design view, I would be able to change data types in here. We don't really need to change one, but let's go ahead and change company name to number. And this is flowing through to the linked table in the front end of the database. It would allow me to save this change. If I really wanted to make this change, it would allow me to save this change. So I'm not going to go through with this because I don't really want that to be a number, and the company name field appears on a lot of reports. But this one would allow you to do that if you really needed to do it. You have to do it in the back end of the database. I'm going to just put that back to short text, and I'm going to go ahead and close, and it's going to allow me to save the changes to the design of the table. So I'm going to say yes because I changed it back to short text. So this is the part of the database that a whole bunch of people will not be given access to. You can go ahead and close this database and reopen your other one. So now we're going to address what would happen if you were to move the back end side of the database to another directory, and what you would need to do in Access to resolve it. So let's set up that situation. I'm going to just move to my working directory, and I'm going to grab the _BE backend file, and I'm going to cut it. And I'm going to just paste it onto my desktop for right now. And I'm going to bring my Access database back up. So if I hover over the customers table, it still says it's going to my class files, my working directory, and I've moved it. If I try to open the customers table, I'm going to still get in design view, I'm going to get that same message, and I'm going to click no on it. But if I double click it and try to open it, I'll get the message saying it could not find that file. And that's because we've just moved it. So I'm going to click OK. We're going to go to the external data tab of the ribbon to fix this. And we're going to use the linked table manager in the first group on that ribbon tab. So go ahead and click on Linked Table Manager. And the beauty of this is on the right side, you can just click Select All to select all of your tables. And at the bottom, you're going to check the box that says Always Prompt for New Location. On the right side, you're going to click OK. So it's asking you to select the new location. Where did you move that backend file to? So I put it on my desktop and I'm going to grab it from there. And I just double clicked it and it says all selected linked tables were successfully refreshed. So I'm going to click OK. I'm going to close the link table manager. And now I'm going to double click the customer's table. And you can see that it lets me open it. It is linked to the one that is in the back end. And I'm going to right click and close it. Now we're going to go through how to customize database options. For some of the options that we're going to change, we're going to have to close and reopen the database for them to take effect. Before we do that, I want us to delete the AutoExec macro that we created earlier. I'm just going to right click on it and delete it. And say yes to confirm the deletion. That's the macro that displayed the featured client form when the database opens. Now we're going to go to the File tab of the ribbon, and all the way at the bottom on the left, we're going to click on Options. You should get comfortable with all of the options available to you in all of the Office programs, but we want to focus on current database options. So I'm selecting current database on the left side. So you notice in Access, the title bar shows the name of the file and then the database, and then it gives the full path to where it is. And you might want your title bar to be simpler. So what we're going to do, we're going to click in the Application Title option, and we're just going to type Office Supplies Database. We're going to tell it to display a form when we open the database, and that form is going to be the switchboard. And then what we're going to do is we're going to tell it to hide the navigation pane. So I'm scrolling down and I'm going to uncheck display navigation pane in the navigation area. Underneath that, in the ribbon and toolbar options area, you're going to uncheck full menus, which impacts the ribbon, and you're going to uncheck allow default shortcut menus, which disallows the ability to get a menu when you right click on an object. So now when we go to the bottom of the screen and click OK, it's going to let us know that we're going to have to close and reopen the current database for the specified option to take effect. You'll notice the one option that already took effect is in the title bar, the application title. So we're going to click OK on that message. And we're going to close this database and then relaunch it from your working directory. So, first thing I want to point your attention to is the ribbon. You only have the File tab and the Home tab, and most of the things on the Home tab are dimmed out and not available to you. The other thing you'll notice is if you right-click on the Switchboard tab, you don't get that right-click shortcut menu because we disallowed them. There is no navigation pane, and the only thing that this particular user would be able to do is utilize the switchboard and close the database. Now let's say you have this set up and something comes up and you need to get the navigation pane back and you want to undo some of these options. Let's go to the File tab and notice most of the File tab options are missing as well, including options where we set these options. So what we need to do to bypass the startup options is we have to open the database in a different way. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to go to File, and we can't even close here. We're going to just exit Access. And then we're going to go back into Access. On the left side, click on Open. You can't use any of the pinned databases here to bypass startup options. You actually have to browse to where the database resides, and then I'll show you what the secret trick is. Let me just get to where this database is. When you click on the database, you're going to hold down your Shift key and then click on Open, or you can double click it once you're holding down Shift. And it's by holding down Shift from the Open dialog box that bypasses the startup options. So now you have your navigation bar back, that form didn't display, the title bar just says Access now. We're going to go to the File tab, and now we can get back to Options. We can go back to Current Database. We're going to undo these options. So we're going to, where it says Display Form, we're going to do None. We're going to scroll down till we get to Navigation and check Display Navigation pane. And under Ribbon and Toolbar options, we're going to check Allow Full Menus and Allow Default Shortcut Menus. And we're going to click OK. It's going to let us know we have to close and reopen it again. And this time we can just close it here. We don't have to open it a special way. I'm simply going to just go to my directory and double click it to open it. We don't need to bypass startup options because we undid them. So that's something that you can do to customize your database. Our last topic here is what to do if your database becomes somewhat corrupted. So Access has a built-in tool that will help with that. Let's go to the File tab, and on the left side we're going to click on Info. The first thing we're going to do is take a look at the size of this database. It's a very small database, but we're going to go over to the right and click on View and Edit Database Properties. And on the General tab, you'll see the size of the database. In my case, 2.80 megabytes. Your number might vary a little bit here and there. I'm going to go ahead and click OK. So once I viewed the size, also on the Info tab, there is a compact and repair database icon. So it helps prevent and correct database file problems by using this tool. We're going to go ahead and click on Compact and Repair Database. And it's already done it. This is a small database. So let's see the effect of that. We weren't particularly having any corruption issues, but let's go back to File, Info, go back to View and Edit Database Properties, and notice because it's Compact and Repair, it decreased the size of the database. So if size becomes an issue, you can use that. If your database becomes somewhat corrupted, if your database, when you're running a query, if it kind of slows down and doesn't show it instantly, that might be a good signal to you that you would want to come and use the Compact and Repair utility. We can click OK and do the back arrow at the top of the band on the left to get back into the database. This module gave you bragging rights. Now you can tell people that you did some coding because you were using Access VBA for complex automation. We use VBA to secure forms with passwords, to create user input boxes, and we did some logic programming using an if-then-else statement in VBA. We went on to split our database into a front end and a back end to ensure security for our tables. So the tables ended up in the back end of the database, and in the front end, there were just linked tables. We learned how to use the linked table manager to update the path once we moved the back end database to a different directory. And we finished up with customizing database options, particularly current database options. And you learned how to change the application title, hide the navigation bar, have it start with a specific form outside of an AutoExec macro. And you also learned, more importantly, how to bypass those startup options so you could get back in and undo them. And then we finished with utilizing the compact and repair utility. That's what you'll use if you start getting some problems with your database.